In theaters in 1960, audience members screamed and fainted as they watched Alfred Hitchcock's newest film, Psycho. They gasped in terror as every single cinematic rule was broken. By directly challenging Hollywood's film standards, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho revolutionized the film industry. Psycho modernized movie theater operations, created the age rating system, and altered the landscape of the horror genre.
Alfred Hitchcock was born in London on August 13, 1899. After attending technical school, he began his career in advertisement. However, pursuing his enthusiasm for photography, Hitchcock entered the London film industry in 1921. He began as a title card designer for silent films. 4 years later, he directed his first film. 23 films later, in 1939, Hitchcock moved to Hollywood.
Specifically came to the US because he was interested in the fact that the Hollywood film industry had a better infrastructure than the British film industry, which was well suited, but he wanted to go bigger and do more complex stuff, have more resources, and Hollywood offered him that opportunity.
At the time, Hollywood was still recovering from a series of scandals. To foster goodwill with the public, Hollywood had implemented a series of regulations known as the Hays Code in 1927. The Hays Code stated that no picture should lower the moral standards of those who see it. To uphold this ideal, unsuitable subjects were censored. Although the code succeeded in enforcing its moral guidelines, it handicapped creativity.
In 1959, Alfred Hitchcock began brainstorming again. His previous film, No Bail for the Judge, had been struck down by the Hays Code. After that disappointment, Hitchcock decided that for his next film, he would create something innovative that played to audiences' interests. Inspired by the success of recent horror films like Frankenstein and Dracula, Hitchcock decided to put his own twist on the genre. He purchased the rights to a book about a murderer with a personality disorder, Robert Bloch's Psycho.
In Psycho, Marion Crane stays overnight at the secluded Bates Motel. There she meets Norman Bates, the motel owner and caretaker of his sickly mother, Mrs. Bates. Later that night, Marion is brutally stabbed to death by a female figure. Marion's disappearance is investigated by her sister and boyfriend, who discover the corpse of Mrs. Bates in the basement. In a shocking twist, Norman has a split personality disorder, and he believes himself to be Mrs. Bates. His Mrs. Bates persona is the killer.
Because of the violent content, Hitchcock faced his first major issue. Paramount, his production company, refused to finance the movie. However, they agreed to show it in theaters if Hitchcock financed the film himself, which he agreed to. That was all based on the assumption that it would pass the Hays Code, which was another problem because he was attempting to create a horror film when showing gore on screen was forbidden. In an interview, Hitchcock explained,
"I believe in putting the horror in the mind of the audience and not necessarily on the screen."
Rather than directly showing it, he implied violence. Even in his infamous shower scene, the audience was only shown clips of Marion screaming at a figure with a knife. Because there was no gore on screen, the censors for the Hays Code reluctantly approved the film.
Hitchcock managed to make Psycho so terrifying that audience members across the US fainted. Many women wrote to Janet Leigh, the actress who played Marion Crane, to tell her that they refused to shower after watching Psycho. To build this level of fear, Hitchcock relied on suspense. However, suspense did not work well in movie theaters in that day. Before Psycho, theaters would run movies in a loop. Moviegoers arrived during the film, then watched the beginning segments they missed after the end. This forced movie plots to be episodic rather than an overarching story. Psycho was not like this. The impact of Marion's death and the final plot twist would be ruined if the film was not watched from start to finish.
Hitchcock's solution was to have all movie theaters set start times for Psycho, which Paramount allowed because he financed the film himself. After the film began, audience members would be locked into the room and latecomers would be locked out. Psycho became the second highest grossing film of 1960, in part because audiences wanted to experience this new way of running theaters. Psycho's popularity encouraged all movie theaters to follow Hitchcock's model, and the policy revolutionized the experience of watching a film.
With scheduled start times, audiences witnessed movies together as a community rather than as isolated individuals. The audience's experience as a whole was a new facet for directors to manipulate. Filmmakers could play with the audience's emotions and create mysteries where every detail would pay off. Additionally, as plots evolved to be tighter and novel-like, the film industry began to prioritize movies that utilize complex plot points. Psycho's influence normalized the assumption that all audience members have the same knowledge at the same time, which allowed these developments. Modern cinematic narratives and plot structures are built on this foundational concept.
Psycho's success revealed that audiences were excited by films that explored darker and more challenging topics. In Psycho, Hitchcock pushed the boundaries of the Hays Code, showing audiences graphic violence, Marion Crane in a bra and slip, and even a flushing toilet for the first time. It also defied expectations by killing off the apparent main character. However, the general public and critics alike loved it. A newspaper reported that all I could hear as I walked out of the theater were words in praise for this fine film. Psycho was deemed a skillfully done horror masterpiece.
The overall positive reaction proved that Americans wanted to see films that defied societal norms. The Hays Code stood for the opposite. It censored daring ideas to enforce a moral code that audiences no longer craved. Psycho's praise reflected a broader societal shift towards challenging traditions. Throughout the 1960s, Americans participated in major moral reform movements such as the Civil Rights Movement, and they witnessed the Vietnam War. They became more open to discussion of previously taboo topics and wanted films to address violence and injustice rather than avoid it.
The Hays Code forced movies to follow an outdated philosophy from a time period that audiences no longer identified with. Instead of being told what they were allowed to see, Americans wanted the opportunity to choose. Psycho was a component within a much larger narrative of transforming values. It forced Hollywood to acknowledge that Americans wanted the film industry to mirror their current society instead of past ideals. The Hays Code was abolished less than a decade after Psycho's release in 1968. It was replaced with the MPAA rating system, where audiences could choose whether a film was suitable specifically for them, instead of only having options that have been deemed suitable for everyone.
Psycho fostered the idea that unthinkable violence could happen to anyone, which horrified and fascinated audiences. Its broadest contribution to horror was challenging traditional narrative structures.
By not letting us meet Norman until 35 minutes into the movie, Hitchcock gave us Marion as the point of identification, right? People go to the movies, we tend to find some character or something that we say we identify with. And then 42 minutes into the movie, he takes her away. You and I as audiences, we have been building this point of identification. We think the movie is about Marion and the $40,000, but that's not what the movie's about. And the courage, and at the same way, the prescience it takes for Hitchcock to say, I'm going to pull one on the audience that they have never seen before. Nobody had taken a major character that we think is what the movie's about away from us before the half point of the movie. People were going nuts.
Killing off the main character halfway through the film shocked audience members. By removing narrative safety, Psycho altered viewers' expectations.
Psycho was the first movie to be described as a, quote, as a roller coaster, sort of compared to the experience of the roller coaster in terms of the swinging emotions and the thrill.
Psycho's success encouraged directors to start the shift from supernatural predictable films to films with a shock factor and reflections of realism. Beyond its contributions to the art of creating horror films, Psycho reframed the entire horror industry. Horror, which had been previously viewed as cheap and mediocre, could be serious and artistically significant to both the cinema and American culture. The thematic elements of Psycho showed how horror could be used to enhance discussions of serious topics like psychology. Psycho confirmed that horror could be worthy of academic discussion and critical analysis.
In creating Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock took one of the most important risks in film history. Psycho radically altered many components of the horror genre by having ordinary people in a seemingly ordinary place become victims to indiscriminate brutality. Creating fear in the mind of the viewer and on screen redefined and mainstreamed psychological horror. Psycho's usage of graphic violence normalized the addition of gore into films. Additionally, elements from Psycho such as a killer with a knife, suspense, and picking off isolated victims one by one evolved into the slasher genre. Hitchcock created horror that was deeper than pure violence, which altered the societal outlook on horror.
Making Psycho was vital to the development of the modern film industry, and it sent ripples through every aspect of cinema. Because of Psycho, movie theaters have set showing times, the Hays Code was abolished, and the horror genre became artistically respectable. Psycho permanently transformed the way movies are experienced, showing how innovation can alter the boundaries of art.